There is a moment in the very first episode of Invincible where the show stops being what you thought it was. The Guardians of the Globe are dead. Omni Man is standing in the middle of the room, breathing slowly, and the camera does not look away. Every season since has lived in the shadow of that scene, because underneath the speeches and the fights, the show keeps asking one quiet question. What else is being hidden? By whom? And for how long? Tonight we are going through every major conspiracy theory the show and its fans have built around Invincible. The ones the writers have basically admitted, the ones the comic confirms in ways the show might not, and the ones that are still just rumors in the quietest corners of the internet. So get comfortable, turn the lights down, and if you have not subscribed to Rock yet, it really does help us keep making these long ones. The first conspiracy is the one almost everything else hangs on, and it has a name: Cecil Stedman. From the moment you meet him, he is leaning in doorways, smoking, looking tired in a way that suggests he was tired a long time before any of this started. He is the head of the Global Defense Agency, the man with the override codes, the man with the teleporter, the man who appears in a hospital room 3 seconds after Mark stops a robbery in another state. And every time you watch the show again, you notice him noticing things just a beat earlier than he should. The conspiracy is simple, and it sits at the heart of the entire series. Cecil knew, maybe not the whole truth, maybe not the exact moment Nolan would snap, but he knew enough about what Omni Man was, where he came from, what he was capable of, and he chose to let the most powerful being on the planet keep walking around among them, while he quietly built contingencies in the basement. The show never quite says this out loud. It does not have to. You can read it in the way Cecil talks to Nolan in private, the way he tests him without ever calling it a test, the way the Guardians of the Globe are reorganized after the massacre with a speed that suggests someone had been drawing up replacement rosters for a while. The argument here is not that Cecil planned the Guardians' deaths, because nothing supports that, and the show goes out of its way to show him devastated by the loss. The argument is that Cecil long suspected Nolan was capable of something monstrous, and accepted that as the price of a flying god on retainer, the way a country accepts a nuclear weapon it cannot quite control but cannot quite give up. That is the heart of it. The man who runs a planet's superhero policy looked at a man whose origin story did not add up and decided not to ask the second question. Once you accept that reading, the rest of the show changes shape. Every speech he gives Mark about trust, every line about what it costs to do the job, every time he says he is the only one in the room willing to make the hard call, lands differently. He is not lecturing a young hero, he is confessing to one, and he is making sure that the next Viltrumite alive on Earth grows up belonging to him instead of to the Empire. That is why Cecil collects Mark so carefully. That is why he leans on him after Nolan leaves. That is why he runs the recordings, plays Mark his own father's voice screaming, walks the line of cruelty in the name of management. He is not a villain. The show is quite clear that he is doing what he believes a man in his chair has to do. But the deeper version of this reading suggests he was always doing it, from before Mark was born, that the file on Nolan was thicker than anyone realized, and that the price of having Omni Man on the team was knowing one day someone in Cecil's job was going to have to deal with what he became. He inherited that responsibility. He passed it forward, and the fact that he survived at all is a miracle of timing. Whether you read him as ruthless or as cornered, the through line is that nothing on Invincible's Earth happens without Cecil knowing about it first. The Reanimen are his. The lab is his. The kill switches are his. He has files on people who do not know he has files on them. He has body doubles. He has handlers handling other handlers. The world Mark grew up in was already being held together with strings he could not see, and Cecil was the one holding the strings. So the conspiracy is not that Cecil is evil. It is that the surveillance state in Invincible is not a metaphor or a background detail. It is the engine the show runs on, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. The second conspiracy is the one the show kept tucked inside a helmet for 2 seasons, and even now you can argue it is still half hidden. The conspiracy of Robot. From the beginning, he is the quietest member of the teen team. He speaks in a calm, modulated voice through a faceplate. He hangs back. He lets Rex do the swaggering and Eve do the heart, and Duplicate do the work. He never takes the helmet off. He never sleeps over. When the new Guardians are auditioning, he is the one running pieces of the structure around them, organizing, assessing, weighing who gets the slot. And every time a viewer paused on him in those early episodes and asked themselves who this person actually is, the show would smile and move on. The reveal, when it comes, lands as if the writers had been holding their breath for years. The thing inside the suit is not a robot at all. It is a small, frail person with a body that does not work, watching the world through screens, sending a machine out to do the living for him. And the darker reading is that Robot's quiet stretches of screen time, his constant availability, his uncanny competence, were not background traits. They were the first stage of a plan. From the moment Robot meets Rex Splode, he is studying him. He is studying his powers, his personality, his body. He talks to him, he watches him fail, he learns him from the inside out. And then he makes a body, not for Rex, for himself. A body that looks like Rex, aged forward into the kind of adult Rex would never have grown into. Tall, strong, beautiful, awake. The argument that runs through fan readings of Robot is that he chose Rex because Rex was easy to take from, because Rex projected a confidence he did not actually own, because Rex's body, biologically, made for a clean genetic template. And the show plays Robot's longing for that body as romantic, until you start to count the years he was watching, and the way he never asks anyone's permission for any of it. The fan position is that Robot was never the team's strategist. He was its predator. Every move he makes in the show's first stretch can be reread as positioning. He befriends Monster Girl knowing her condition is going to drive every other partner away. He builds her a way to live with the curse, slowly, carefully, until she trusts him in a way she trusts almost no one. He keeps his condition a secret from the rest of the team, because to share it would be to lose the leverage of being the calm one. And when the Guardians fracture, when half of them quit, when the politics shift, it is Robot who reorganizes the chain of command. Robot who picks the next leaders. Robot who quietly turns the resurrection sciences inside the agency into something he can use. The dark reading is that he is doing what Cecil does, only younger, and without the moral cover. He is collecting power. He is collecting people, and he is doing it under the protection of a face that does not change. The show does not condemn him for it because it lets him have something approaching a love story, but the texture of that love story is constantly off. The body he wears is not consented to. The relationship he builds is built inside a lie. The team he leads does not understand what they are leading. And the long arc of Robot, the way it bends through the run of the show, is the slow recognition by everyone around him that the boy in the suit was never on their side in the way they thought. He was on his side. He was always on his side. And every kindness he extended, including the ones that read as genuine, was also a way to make sure the world he was building had a place for the person he eventually became. That is the Robot reading. It is not that he is secretly evil, it is that he never let anyone see him be anything until he had already decided who he was going to be, and by then, it was too late to vote. The third conspiracy is the one Invincible's whole science fiction skeleton is built on, and it is the easiest to overlook because the show keeps the Empire mostly off-screen. The Viltrumite Empire is presented to you, at first, as a thing a single character has lied about. Nolan tells you, and he tells Mark, that the Viltrumites are a benevolent species of peacekeepers who police the galaxy and elevate weaker worlds. That story collapses in episode 1, and you spend the rest of the show learning what the Empire actually was. But the fan reading goes further than the show is ever willing to say out loud. By most accounts, it goes like this. The Viltrumites are not just an evil empire, they are a project of selective survival. They winnowed themselves down through internal violence, until almost nothing of the original culture remained. They culled their own. They thinned their own gene pool. They turned themselves into an army of nearly identical perfect bodies that could not breed effectively with each other anymore. The Empire you see is the result of a centuries-long civil sorting, and the reason they are losing in the long run is that they made themselves into a species too good to reproduce. The show hints at this through the way Viltrumite births are treated as rare and precious. The fact that Nolan is sent so far from home for a breeding mission is itself the giveaway. Earth is not just being conquered, it is being farmed. Nolan was not just here to soften the planet, he was here to make children. The argument then is that the conquest plan and the breeding plan were always the same plan. The Empire needed new viable hybrids because pure Viltrumites had reached a biological dead end. The way the show presents it, in the comics and on the page that the show borrows from, the more honest version is that the Empire is a society that ran out of people and decided to take the universe instead of fixing itself. Mark is the thing it was farming for. Oliver is the thing it was farming for. The reason Nolan turns when he turns, the reason he chooses his children, the reason he cannot quite kill Mark in the moment he tries, is that the Empire's logic and the family logic are pointing in the same direction, and only one of them gets to win. The dark reading on top of that is the suspicion that everything the Empire still claims to be is a story it tells itself. The pride, the supremacy, the conquest as a kindness, all of it is myth maintenance on a species that has been dying for generations and would rather rule the universe than admit it. Once you read them this way, every Viltrumite the show puts on screen plays differently. Conquest is not just a sadist. He is what an empire makes when it needs an enforcer who will never feel a doubt. Anissa is not just a soldier. She is a breeding mission with a body. Lucan and the other enforcers around him are not just henchmen. They are the last enthusiastic believers in a faith that is killing its own church. The show does not lay this out as a thesis. It lets you see it through their behavior. And once you see it, the war Mark is being pulled into is not a war between heroes and villains. It is a war between a dying culture trying to convert him and an Earth trying to keep him long enough to think for himself. The fourth conspiracy is the one almost everyone catches on second watch, but cannot quite let go of, and it belongs to Donald Ferguson. Donald is Cecil's aide. Donald is the calm voice over the headset. Donald is the man who walks into burning buildings carrying a clipboard. From the first time you meet him, he is unnaturally composed, almost beyond what the situations he is put in should allow. He does not flinch. He does not run. And then, slowly, the show begins to drop little wrong notes into his presence. He does not seem hungry. He does not seem startled. He has a way of walking through wreckage that suggests he has done it before, more than once, in ways he should not have survived. The truth, when the show finally gets to it, is that Donald has been dying for a long time. He died once, and Cecil rebuilt him, and then it happened again, and the man you are watching is not the man he was. He is a copy with the same memories, or more than that, a body engineered to keep going long after the original could not. There are moments in the show where Donald begins to suspect this himself, where he finds evidence in his own apartment that does not square with what he remembers, where Cecil's quiet apologies start to take on the weight of something deeper than a workplace conversation. The deeper read is that Cecil has been using Donald as a kind of unkillable proxy for years. Every time something throws Donald into a wall, every time he should not have walked away from an explosion, every time he is in the room where a god is being told no, the reason he survives is that he was never quite alive in the way the rest of us define it. The horror of the Donald arc, and the show plays it as horror, is not just that he learns he has been dead, it is that the version of him you have come to know has been engineered to be obedient. He is calm because calm is what Cecil needs. He is faithful because faith is what Cecil installed. Some fans go further. They argue that Donald is the prototype, not the exception, that there are Donalds quietly running pieces of the Global Defense Agency, all of them survivors of explosions they should not have walked away from, all of them grateful to a man who keeps remaking them. Cecil sees this as kindness. Donald, when he learns, does not. And underneath the Donald story is a quieter one about consent, about what a leader is allowed to do to keep his people alive, about whether bringing someone back as a copy of themselves is bringing them back at all, or whether it is just a way to keep using a face. The show does not give you a clean answer. It lets you watch a man slowly understand that his loyalty was manufactured along with his body, and it lets you decide whether that loyalty still counts. And the Donald reading ripples outward, because if Cecil can do that to Donald, he can do it to others. He can do it to soldiers. He can do it to heroes. Some fans suggest the Reanimen are not the only resurrection program, that the real basement under the agency is a long row of people who have died on duty, lined up against the wall, waiting to be brought back when the next emergency demands it. Nothing on the show confirms that. Plenty on the show makes it feel possible, and the Donald revelation is the open door through which all those darker possibilities walk in. The fifth conspiracy is the one the show practically waves a hand at, and it lives in the cracked skull of Angstrom Levy. Angstrom is, by his own description, a man trying to make the world better. He has the ability to open portals to other realities, and what he is doing with that ability, when you meet him, is collecting the wisest versions of himself from 1,000 alternate timelines, combining their knowledge into a single consciousness, and using that god-level intellect to help. The fan reading, the one that has been built into a full scaffolding, is that Angstrom's portal walking is the show telling you that the multiverse is real, and that every Mark Grayson in every other timeline is something the show is afraid to show you. When the procedure goes wrong, when Angstrom is left with a scarred mind, and a mismatched skull, and a hatred for Mark that bends the rest of his life, what he has access to is not just one alternate Earth. It is an unlimited supply of them, and what he sees, in those Earths, is variations on Mark. By most fan readings, almost none of the variations are good. Angstrom does not stay sane in part because he keeps stepping into worlds where Mark conquered, worlds where Mark killed his mother, worlds where Mark sided with Nolan, worlds where Mark replaced Nolan and built a worse empire than the one his father served. The show in its later seasons takes you into this idea more directly, with sequences that show alternate Marks who have become monsters, with hallucinations and visions and parallel timelines bleeding into the main story. The argument is that this is the most important plant the show ever made. Mark Grayson is not a hero who might fall. He is a hero who, statistically across the multiverse, falls more often than he stands. The math of his choices does not favor him. The reason Angstrom hates him is not because Mark personally did anything to him. It is because Angstrom has seen too many Marks to believe that the one in front of him will be different. The Portal Man is the show's way of arguing that destiny in Invincible is not preordained, but is heavily, heavily weighted. The dark version of the reading is that Angstrom is right, that the show is going to converge on its own multiverse logic, that whatever final form Mark takes is going to be a version of evil, and that the only way the show can give you a happy ending is to cheat that logic. What this becomes, then, is a reading about the writing itself. Does Invincible believe in free will, or does it believe that a Viltrumite born to Nolan Grayson, raised on Earth, given access to power and grief, and the company of other gods, is always going to end up the same way, no matter how the dice are thrown? The Angstrom reading is not just about a villain. It is about a thesis. And the thesis is that there are not really that many Marks who get to walk away clean. The sixth conspiracy follows directly out of that, and it is the one Mark fans hate to talk about because it implies a betrayal that has not happened yet. The fan claim that Mark will fall. From the first season, the show frames Mark's most terrifying possibility as the same fear Mark himself carries. He could become his father. The face is the same, the voice is becoming the same, the way he holds himself in the air is being shaped, episode by episode, into a shadow of Nolan. The argument is that this is not subtext. It is foreshadowing. The show is preparing you, slowly, methodically, for a turn. Every time Mark loses control, every time he flies too close to an edge, every time he says something that sounds like a sentence Nolan might have spoken, the writers are putting a brick in the wall of the inevitability of his fall. The fan theory, drawn partly from the comic and partly from the producer's own willingness to flirt with the idea, is that Invincible's endgame is a Mark Grayson who, at his lowest, becomes a version of the thing he was raised to fight. Whether the show goes all the way into that or pulls back from it, you can already see the shape. The marriage stress, the loss of friends, the war ahead, the grief stacking. Some viewers go further still. They suggest the show keeps showing you Mark's worst moments not to spike a single arc but to build a record. By the time you watch his eyes go cold for the wrong reason, the record will be long enough that you will not be able to argue he did not see it coming. The deeper version of this reading suggests that this is the only reason Cecil keeps him close. Cecil is not protecting Mark from villains. Cecil is keeping the future evil king of Earth on a leash because he watched Nolan and he learned. The kindness of Cecil's mentorship is also management of an asset he expects to lose control of one day, and the more openly cruel reading argues that the show is telling you, in its quietest moments, that there is no version of this story where Mark stays the boy you met. The body cannot hold him. The choices cannot hold him. The wife cannot hold him. The child, when she comes, will not hold him either. Whether this is what the show will actually deliver, no one outside the writer's room knows. But the suspicion that Mark is being built into a tragedy is one the show keeps feeding without ever quite admitting. Every fight, every funeral, every season finale that ends with Mark staring at his own hands plays into it. The audience has been told to love a young hero. The show, quietly, has been telling you the young hero may not be the man at the end. The seventh conspiracy hides inside a glow, and her name is Samantha Eve Wilkins. Adam Eve is presented to you, when the show begins, as a young woman with the ability to manipulate matter at the molecular level. She can build, she can repair, she can shape almost anything that is not organic. The fan reading is that this restriction, the rule that she cannot work with living tissue, is not a restriction at all. It is a story told to her. The reason she cannot use her powers on organic matter, in the version the show first sells you, is that she has been told from childhood it is too dangerous, that something bad would happen, that her powers do not work that way. The darker version of the argument is that the limit is psychological, that it was placed there for her safety by adults who did not trust a child to handle a god power, and that what Eve is, underneath the limit, is one of the most overwhelmingly capable beings the show has ever introduced. The next thread asks the harder question. If Eve can heal, why does anyone die in Invincible? The answer the show gives, in the quiet moments she does cross that line, in the times she begins to learn that the rule was never absolute, is that doing it costs her something. There is a tax, there is a price. And the price might be measured in years, or in stability, or in some other thing the show has not yet fully described. The argument is that Eve is the most powerful person on the team, and that knowing it is unsafe for her. Mark can throw a tank, Robot can build a body, Cecil can spend a country, Eve can rewrite the molecular world. And the reason the show keeps her, for so long, in the role of healer and helper and support, is that giving her the full run of her powers would break the story. Some fans extend this further. They say Eve's mother, the cold woman who never wanted her, is part of the reason the limits were planted. That the agency, or someone like them, has had a quiet interest in keeping Eve calm her whole life. That the reason her childhood was full of disapproval and absence was not bad luck. It was design. A version of Eve that knew what she could do, raised by parents who loved her, would have stepped past the limits when she was small. The Eve who stays inside them, who hesitates, who suffers, who has to relearn her own power every season, is the safe one. Put plainly, the suspicion is that Adam Eve has been kept small on purpose, and that the show is slowly letting her grow. In a series obsessed with the question of whether power corrupts, the writer's choice to keep their most malleable god as a young woman who only ever uses her power to help is not an accident. It is a thesis. Eve is what the show suggests Mark could be if he were not raised by an empire. And the comparison, fans argue, is the whole point. The eighth conspiracy looks at a man in a coat, and the question of whether he is from where he says he is from. Damien Darkblood is a small horned figure who appears in the wake of the Guardians of the Globe murders. He calls himself a detective. He speaks in a low growl. He says he is from hell. And the show plays this almost as a joke, almost as a noir parody, with a tiny demon doing classic detective work in a world of capes. The fan reading is that none of it is a joke. Damien Darkblood is exactly what he says he is. He is a demon from hell, summoned or escaped, walking the world, doing penance through detective work. The surface layer is the simplest one. He knows. Damien Darkblood is the first character in the show to actually know what happened in that opening massacre. He looks at the scene, he looks at the bodies, he looks at Nolan, and he can read it the way you, the viewer, can already read it. He shows up at the Grayson house. He sniffs around Debbie. He tries to tell her what he knows, and he is dismissed because the answers he is offering are too terrible to absorb. Underneath that surface, Damien is the only character in the show who is operating on the truth from day one and being ignored by everyone, including the agency. Cecil knows. Damien knows. And yet Cecil shuts Damien down, has him removed, tells him to stop. Why? The dark reading is that Cecil and Damien know the same thing for very different reasons, and that Damien's existence is threatening to Cecil, because Cecil is running a containment program and Damien is running an investigation. They are pointed at the same body of truth, but their goals are not aligned. Cecil wants to manage, Damien wants to expose, and so Cecil makes Damien go away. There is a further argument that Damien Darkblood is not just a detective, he is a witness, in the religious sense. He sees evil, he follows it. The show flirts with this by giving him supernatural perception, by letting him sniff death the way a dog sniffs a trail. The case fans build is that the Invincible universe is a universe where hell is real and where supernatural rules quietly apply, even though most of the show is presented as science fiction, and Damien is the proof. He is the smallest character on the show and the one carrying the most metaphysical weight. He sees the moral structure of the world clearly because he has had to, and the choice Debbie eventually makes to actually listen to him, to believe what he is telling her, is the show acknowledging that the demon was right. The horror of the Damien Darkblood reading is the implication that all the suffering Debbie goes through could have been shortened if she had trusted the strange little detective the first time. He came to her because he saw something. She did not believe him because believing him meant believing the worst of someone she loved. The show uses him to make a quiet point about denial, and the suggestion is that he was always going to be right. He is from hell, and in this story, hell is where the truth lives. The ninth conspiracy takes you off Earth, into the dark hum of coalition ships, and into a friendship the show has been building so carefully you sometimes forget it has another layer to it. The reading of Alan the Alien. Alan is, on the surface, exactly what he is sold to you as. A large, immensely strong officer working for an interstellar alliance that opposes the Viltrumite Empire. He is funny, he is warm, he loves Earth food, he calls Mark a friend in a voice that always sounds like he is about to grin. And underneath that, the show plants two slow-ticking ideas. The first is that Alan is being lied to by his own boss. Theaetus, the head of the Coalition, is presented as a wise old being who fights Viltrumite expansion. The argument is that Theaetus is himself a former Viltrumite, that he survived the Empire's purges, that he has been hiding what he is from Alan for the entire run of the show, and that the moment he tells Alan the truth is going to recontextualize half the things Alan has done in his service. The second slow plant is that Alan himself is not what he thinks he is. Some viewers go so far as to suggest that Alan is, in some way, related to the Viltrumites, that his species was engineered, or that his individual strength is too anomalous to be ordinary, that the moment he meets a Viltrumite head-on, the Empire flinches because they see something they did not expect. The reason this matters is that Alan has been Mark's friend from outside the system. He has been the one voice from off-Earth telling Mark to think about the bigger picture. The deeper view is that the show has spent that whole time slowly setting up Alan's transformation into a player on the main board, not just a guide. By the time the Coalition is fully mobilized against the Empire, Alan is not a sidekick. He is one of the major military assets in the galaxy. And if Theaetus is a Viltrumite, the political math changes entirely. The Coalition has been a Viltrumite-led resistance against Viltrumite expansion. That is not a betrayal. It is a civil war fought across 1,000 light-years. The wider claim is that the show has been telling you a galactic political drama in the background while it was distracting you with Earth's family dramas, and that the two storylines are about to collide. Alan is the bridge. He has been the bridge from the beginning. His friendship with Mark is not a comic relief subplot. It is the only working channel between the Coalition and the Viltrumite's most strategically important target, and both sides know it. The dark version is that everyone has been using Alan, gently. Theaetus has been using him as a recruiter. The Empire has been watching him as a weapon. Mark has been treating him as a friend. And Alan, sweet, loud, simple Alan, has been quietly doing everything anyone asks of him because he believes in the cause, because he is loyal, because he does not see the politics behind his own life. So the conspiracy of Alan is that the most uncomplicated character in the show is the one carrying the most invisible weight. And when he finds out, finally, what Theaetus is, the reaction the show captures is one of the most honest in the run. Not anger, hurt. The hurt of someone realizing the war he has been fighting was not the war he thought he was fighting. Underneath that hurt is the reason fans cling to the Alan reading. The story has been waiting for him to grow up. The suggestion is that the boyish best friend has been one of the most important political figures in the galaxy the whole time, and only the audience has been allowed to notice. The 10th conspiracy is one the show has not spoken aloud yet, and that is part of what makes fans circle it like a candle in a dark room. It is the Shadow of Thragg. In the comic continuity that the show draws from, Thragg is the Grand Regent of the Viltrumite Empire, the absolute peak of the species. The soldier so perfect he becomes a kind of secular god. He is the ceiling above every other Viltrumite the show has so far put on screen. Nolan answered to him, Conquest answered to him, Anissa answered to him, and in the comic he becomes the final long boss of the entire run. The show, at the time of this writing, has been careful about how it names him. The most common reading among fans is that the writers are hiding Thragg on purpose, that every time you see a Viltrumite refer to a higher authority, every time the chain of command extends just out of frame, every time the Emperor is referenced but not seen, Thragg is the unspoken name. They are building him slowly, the way a horror movie builds a monster, refusing to give you a clean look until the moment it cannot avoid. The argument goes further than that. It says the absence of Thragg is itself a hint. Why does the Empire keep losing officers to Earth? Why does the Empire send second-tier soldiers to retrieve Nolan when the situation is clearly a galactic priority? The fan claim is that there is a politics inside the Empire, that the show is going to reveal eventually, that Thragg is not just a ruler but a faction, and that the reason certain Viltrumites are being thrown at Mark is not bad strategy. It is internal sorting. The Empire is using Earth as a test ground for which of its lower officers it can afford to lose. Mark, without knowing it, has been participating in a Viltrumite leadership culling. Every soldier he kills clears a path for someone above. Every soldier he turns to the resistance moves a piece across the board for a war the audience has not seen begin. Thragg, in this reading, is not yet active because his activation is the show's final act. The darkest version says that Thragg is already on Earth. That somewhere, in some unrecognizable body, in some unguessed civilian life, the Grand Regent has come to look at the planet that is producing his species' most important hybrid in centuries. That he has been close to Mark in ways the audience has not yet been allowed to see. There is no on-screen evidence of this. The show has not done it. But the speculation lives because it makes a kind of sense. A ruler that careful, that long-lived, that strategically perfect, does not entrust the most important breeding operation in his empire's history to a single soldier without looking in himself. So the suggestion is that Thragg has had eyes on Mark since Mark was a baby. That every soft moment of Mark's childhood was, in some unmeasurable way, also a moment under observation. And the way the show is building Thragg, slowly, by absence, by the polite refusal to name him, is the way you build the kind of villain that breaks an audience's heart when he finally arrives. He is a sword still in its scabbard. The show is going to draw it. And when it does, the rules of the entire series are going to change. The 11th conspiracy belongs to the oldest character in the show, and his title is, in some ways, the whole problem, the Immortal. He calls himself that, he believes he is that, and the show spends its run gently dismantling the title without ever fully refusing it. The Immortal is one of the original guardians of the globe, one of the founders, a man who has been around in some form for the entire history of organized heroism on Earth. What fans gravitate toward is not the fact that he is immortal, but that he has been alive long enough to have become someone other than the man he was, and that the version of him you meet is a stitched-together identity covering a much messier truth. The most literal reading first. Is he really immortal? The show has shown him die. He has been killed and brought back. He has had body parts severed and regrown. The argument from the fan community is that he is a regenerator, not an immortal, that he is the closest thing the show has to a Wolverine, and that the title he gives himself is closer to a brand than a biology. Some take this further. They argue that the Immortal has died many more times than the show has been willing to depict, that he has been brought back by Cecil's resurrection programs at least as often as Donald has been, that he is not the same man across multiple deaths. Each resurrection in this reading takes a piece of him out and replaces it with something less. The reason he can sound a little hollow, the reason his speeches sometimes feel like they were rehearsed by someone trying to remember how to be a person, is that the version of him that founded the Guardians is largely no longer there. The Immortal, in this reading, is a kind of mascot, a costume worn by sequential personalities of the same man, none of whom remember each other quite as fully as they pretend to. A second strand involves his actual age. There are fans who argue that the Immortal predates the United States, that he is a being who was alive in Lincoln's era, that he has fought in wars he no longer brings up, and that the reason he carries himself with a certain unfocused melancholy is that he has watched a country change shape around him so many times the changes do not register anymore. The third reading is the heaviest, and it is the one the show begins to give you in pieces as it follows him after the massacre. The Immortal is the only Guardian alive who was directly killed by Nolan in the first episode. He is, by some readings, the strongest member of that team. And the fact that Nolan killed him at all means that the comforting myth of his title is not true. He died. Whatever brought him back was something else. There is then the suggestion that he is the show's secret meditation on grief. He cannot really die, but he can really lose, and the people he loses do not come back. He carries the corpse of his identity. He puts on the costume of his hope. He keeps trying to lead because leading is what he is for, even though he is no longer the man who first wanted to. The dark version says he is going to be the one in the room at the end, looking at whatever Mark becomes, and seeing the same thing in Mark's eyes he saw in Nolan's before the punch landed. The Immortal will recognize the Empire returning. He will recognize a Viltrumite tilting. And the question the show seems to be saving for him is whether he can throw a single more punch when the moment comes. The title was always ironic. He is a man for whom every day is a long memorial, and the only thing keeping him going is that someone in the suit has to. The 12th conspiracy travels off Earth, across the void, and into the red sand of Mars. The Sequids are the show's slow-burn nightmare. They are introduced almost casually, as a subplot involving a manned mission to Mars that goes wrong, that becomes a desperate flight home, that contains a small extra detail almost nobody catches the first time. There is a Sequid attached to a vessel that comes back. The Sequids are a hive species. They take over bodies. They form a collective. They have a queen, or something close enough that the word fits. What fans have built around this is the idea that the show planted them deliberately as a long fuse, that they have been on Earth for far longer than the show has admitted, and that everything that has happened in the human politics of the run has been quietly shadowed by an alien colonization that is patiently maturing inside the planet's own infrastructure. The first thread is small. How many Sequids actually came back from Mars? The show plays the moment quickly, almost as a joke. Many fans argue it is not a joke. They say more than one Sequid made it home, that the Mars expedition was the seeding mission for a long invasion, and that the reason the show keeps returning to Rick Sheridan, the Mars survivor, is that Rick is the test subject for what a partially infected human looks like when they retain enough self to walk in public. The reading extends to a whole secret population. There are theories that high-level positions in industries, in governments, in the military, are quietly Sequid infiltrated, and that the reason certain decisions have not made sense in the show's world building is that the people making them are not entirely themselves. The darker version argues that one of the recurring side characters is already a Sequid host. The fans rotate suspects. They look at posture. They look at affect. They look for the small wrongnesses the show plants for fun. The bigger thread is that the Sequids are a setup for an Invincible War-style event. In the comics, the Sequids become a long-term planetary threat, intersecting with Mark's life in ways that pull him back to Mars and force him to confront an entire species. The show has been holding that storyline in reserve. By most readings, the slow appearances of the Sequids in side stories have been the show's way of saying, this is not over, and that the next time the planet is in genuine danger, it will not be from a Viltrumite at all. It will be from the small purple things crawling out of the bodies you thought you knew. The deeper layer is that the Sequids are the show's argument about communion. They are a species that loses itself by joining. The Viltrumites are a species that loses itself by exclusion. Earth, in between, is a species that loses itself by not noticing. And the suggestion is that the show is using these three philosophies to build a meditation on what is left of a person when the membership of the collective takes priority over the self. Whether or not the show ever fully pays it off, the planting is there. The Sequids are not background. They are a sleeping limb of the story. The 13th conspiracy is one of the show's old jokes, told seriously. The Mauler twins are two large pale men in lab coats, who appear early and keep reappearing, and they are presented as comic relief mad scientists. Their gag, the thing the show wants you to catch immediately, is that they bicker constantly about which one of them is the original and which one of them is the clone. They disagree, they insult each other, they make each other coffee, and they argue while they make it. The fan reading is that the gag is a real philosophical question dressed as humor, and that the show, by letting them argue about it forever, is doing something much more careful than the laughs suggest. The first thread is the direct one. Which one is real? The show plays it as unanswerable. Some viewers believe the show knows the answer and refuses to give it, because the answer would close a thematic door it once left open. The argument is that the original has been dead for a while, that there have been multiple cloning cycles, that the two Maulers you are watching may both be copies of copies, and that the joke between them is also a tragedy. Neither is real anymore. Both believe they are. The second thread is what they have been doing in the background while you were laughing. The Maulers are not just scientists. They are some of the most technically capable people in the show. They have built clones, they have built bodies, they have served other villains, they have shown up in story arcs as the science behind disasters. The argument is that the Maulers have a long client list, that they have been quietly responsible for technologies that surface in other plots without their fingerprints on them, and that some of the show's biggest catastrophes can be traced back to a small gray lab where two large pale men were yelling at each other. The third thread is the one that connects the Maulers to Robot. The show has been very honest that the Maulers worked on Robot's adult body. They built him, in part, from materials that included other people. The implication is that the Maulers know more about the inside of Robot than Robot wants anyone to know. They have the receipts, they have the blueprints, they have somewhere in a drawer the original ledger of what was used and what was promised. And the reason the Maulers do not get killed off, even when they are caught, even when they are arrested, even when they are involved in the worst events of the run, is that anyone smart enough to want a body, or a clone, or a complicated piece of bioengineering knows where to find them. They are too useful to delete. The dark reading is that this makes them, in a strange way, immortal in a sense the immortal is not. As long as someone in the world needs a body grown, the Maulers will be needed, and so the show keeps them. They are funny when they appear. They are inconvenient when you remember everything they have built. The conclusion is that the show's most cartoonish characters are also the load-bearing engineers of half its monsters. They are the gearworks of the cruelty that drives the plot. They are recurring because the show needs them to be. And one of them may not have been a real human being for years. The 14th conspiracy belongs to a project that started as a research program and slowly became a graveyard. The Reanimen are the agency's resurrection super soldiers, originally engineered, as far as the show has shown, by Dr. D.A. Sinclair. The college researcher Cecil quietly recruited after his arrest, and continued under various hands once the project moved inside the agency. The premise of the program is that a dead body can be repurposed into a controllable combat asset, that the brain can be partially preserved or replaced, that the result is something between a soldier and a monster. By many fan readings, you have not yet been shown the worst version of the program. The first thread is whose bodies are being used. The show has been careful, on the surface, to suggest the bodies are villains, criminals, casualties of disasters whose remains were retrievable. The argument is that the program quickly outgrew that supply, and that the agency began to use bodies the public would not recognize as fair game, soldiers who died in the line of duty without family, civilians killed in events the agency covered up, heroes who fell in fights the agency did not want anyone to claim. The dark reading is that some of the Reanimen are recognizable, that if you could see under their masks you would find faces you grew up watching, and that the reason their masks are part of the design is not aesthetic. It is concealment. The second thread is whether the Reanimen are aware. The show plays them, mostly, as obedient husks. Some fans argue that some of them, deep inside, are awake, that the part of the brain that hosted a personality was preserved more thoroughly than the program intended, that when a Reanimen moves a hand and feels a wrongness, something behind the eyes is screaming that no one can hear. The horror of the Reanimen, in this reading, is not their existence but their possible interiority. They might be conscious passengers in their own resurrected bodies. The third thread connects the Reanimen to Donald Ferguson, which connects them to Cecil, which puts them at the center of the conspiracy this whole episode list keeps returning to. If Donald is a copy of himself, brought back by Cecil's technology, then the line between Donald and a Reanimen is thinner than the agency would like to admit. The argument is that the program is a spectrum. On one end, low-function combat units with no self. On the other end, fully restored individuals with private lives and apartments. In between, intermediate beings the public has never met, walking around the agency campus, performing tasks, knowing what they are, but not knowing what to do about it. The deeper claim is that the resurrection economy in Invincible is much bigger than the show has let on. It is its own population. It is its own underclass. It is its own moral failure. And every time Cecil makes a calculation about how to deploy his assets, the people on his board are not just heroes and soldiers. They are the once dead, returned without consenting, and held in service to a man who tells himself he saved them. The argument fans have built around the Reanimen is that they are the show's quietest indictment of utilitarian leadership. They exist because someone decided they should. They suffer because no one wants to admit that they do, and the show, fans suspect, is going to come back to them when it wants to make its grand moral argument explicit. The 15th conspiracy belongs to a woman in a kitchen, and it is the most painful one to talk about. Debbie Grayson is, on paper, the human heart of Invincible. She is the wife who loved Nolan. She is the mother who raised Mark. She is the person who has, in a very real sense, to live in the rubble of every catastrophe the show creates. The fan claim is that her arc is much darker than the show is allowed to depict directly, and that fans have been quietly piecing together a portrait of a woman in long-term crisis from clues the show drops in the corners of scenes. The first thread is about the marriage itself. How much did she know? The show takes the position that Debbie was an ordinary woman who married a man who was not what he said he was, and that the truth blindsided her completely. Some viewers argue that small parts of the truth had been arriving in her peripheral vision for years. She lived with a Viltrumite for 2 decades. She slept beside him. She watched him forget the rules of physics in the kitchen and in the bath. She watched him fail to age. The reading is not that she knew he killed the Guardians. It is that she had long suspected there was a wrongness she was not permitted to name, and that part of her grief is not just the betrayal, but the recognition of her own quiet complicity in not asking. The second thread is the drinking. The show has been very honest about Debbie's relationship with alcohol as she falls apart. Some fans argue that the show has actually softened the depth of that period, that the version of it on screen is the tasteful one, and that any reasonable reading of a woman who has been through what Debbie has been through suggests a longer and worse alcoholic spiral than the runtime allows. The interpretation is not judgmental. It is the opposite. It is the argument that the show is telling you the truth about grief in increments, because telling you the whole truth at once would be too much to watch. The third thread is the long-term one, and it is about who Debbie becomes. She is, by the middle stretches of the show, in counseling, she is dating, she is rebuilding, she is functioning. Some fans suspect she is also, quietly, planning. The fan theory is that Debbie has not forgiven Nolan and does not intend to, and that the second she has access to anyone who can hurt him, or anyone who can get a message to him, or anyone who can speak honestly to Mark on her behalf, she will use that access. The argument is that Debbie's softness is a survival mode, that the woman underneath is more furious than the show is ever allowed to show on screen, and that she has been working out, in private, what she would say to her husband if he ever stood in her kitchen again. A fourth thread reads backwards. It says that the show's careful protection of Debbie's interiority, the way it gives her quiet shots and pauses and meditative silences without ever putting her at the center of a big speech, is itself the indication. Debbie is the one character the show is afraid to give voice to fully, because if she said the words, the show would not be the same show, so the show keeps her muted. It lets her be sad. It lets her be brave. It rarely lets her be the truth-telling oracle she could be. The suspicion is that the writers know exactly how angry Debbie should be, and are rationing it, because the audience could not handle a Debbie who unloaded. The Debbie reading is, in a sense, an apology. The show owes her more than it gives her. Fans are watching for the moment it pays. The 16th conspiracy is the hardest one to talk about, and it concerns a Viltrumite woman named Anissa. Anissa appears in the show as one of the Empire's enforcers, sent to remind Mark, in the most violating way the show has so far depicted, that the Empire considers him a stud and intends to treat him as one. The scene the show builds around her is a deliberate horror. It is meant to make you uncomfortable. It is meant to leave Mark, the character, in pieces afterward. By many fan accounts, the show's handling of Anissa is partly a confrontation with the comic, and partly a recalibration. In the original run, she is one of the Empire's most prominent characters, and her arc is complicated, and a significant body of fan discourse exists around what her arc is and what it means. The show has had to figure out how to bring her to the screen in a way that does not glorify the violation while still keeping the character whole. Two predictions branch out of this. The first says the show is going to soften her path significantly, that the writers have already decided to recontextualize Anissa for an audience that would not tolerate every beat of the comic, and that what you are seeing on screen is a deliberate, careful redrafting of the same character into something more morally available. The second says the show is going to follow the comic more closely than it admits, that the difficult choices are coming, and that the writers are simply trying to space them so the audience absorbs them in survivable doses. Either reading turns Anissa into a test case for how the show wants to handle the worst things in its source. The deeper layer is what she represents in the Empire. The Viltrumite project to repopulate the species depends on breeding, and Anissa is not the only soldier deployed for that purpose, but she is the one Mark meets in the most direct and the most personal way. The argument is that the Empire has many Anissas, that there is an entire wing of the Viltrumite war effort dedicated to converting hybrid stock, that what happens to Mark is happening on dozens of other worlds at the same time. The horror is that she is not an exception, she is policy, and what the show has to figure out, as it brings her arc forward, is how to honor the difficulty of that without becoming cruel. The fan reading, when it is being generous, recognizes the writer's situation. The argument is that the show is going to thread a difficult needle, and that the audience is going to be asked to extend a complicated kind of grace, not to Anissa, but to the writers, when the arc fully unfolds. The deeper truth, and the reason this discussion exists, is that in this universe a Viltrumite is a person too. The Empire has shaped what they are. The Empire has selected them. The Empire has trained them not to question the things it asks them to do. Anissa, when she begins to think for herself, is going to be one of the most psychologically interesting characters the show has, because she is going to have to disassemble a lifetime of conditioning to even understand what she did. Whether or not the show takes her there, the suspicion is that this is the arc the writers know they are circling. The audience is watching for the moment a soldier of the Empire becomes a person inside her own head, and the show, fans believe, plans to make you see it, eventually, even though it will be painful in ways the show usually avoids. The 17th conspiracy is a quiet one, and it has been brewing under the surface of the team's dynamics from the start. It belongs to Rex Splode. Rex is, from the first season, presented as a swaggering jackass. He cheats. He brags. He uses other people. He breaks Eve's heart and does not realize it for far too long. He is the character the show wants you to like the least within the teen team, and the show is unafraid to keep him in that role for a long stretch of episodes. The fan reading is that the entire run of Rex is the show's most patient redemption arc, and that everything you dislike about him in the early seasons is being deliberately set up so the writers can pay off, in a moment, an arc that no other character on the show can fill. The first thread is that Rex is the most heroic person on the team and does not know it yet. The argument runs that Rex's power, the ability to charge objects with explosive energy, is a power that only matters when he is willing to give something up. He has to throw things he is touching. He has to be close. He has to risk himself in a way the more invulnerable members of the team do not. The view among Rex fans is that his bluster is a defense against the fact that his power has been quietly forcing him to be brave for a long time, and that the show has been building a final scene in which Rex stops being a coward inside a brave body and becomes the brave man inside a brave body. A second thread is who Rex is loyal to. The show has been very careful to show Rex's loyalty grow. He starts as a man loyal to himself. He becomes a man loyal to the team, when the team accepts him back. He becomes a man loyal to Eve, even after she has moved past him. He becomes a man loyal to a version of right action that he could not articulate in Season 1. The argument is that the show is converting him, slowly, into the character who is going to make the choice that ends a chapter. He will not be saved. He will save someone, and the moment he does, he will earn a place in the story that none of the early viewers expected him to claim. The third thread is more personal. Rex's friendship with Robot is the strangest in the show. They started as colleagues, became enemies, became allies again, became something more complicated than a friendship, and stranger than a rivalry. The reading is that the bond between Rex and Robot is the long-delayed apology of the show. Robot took something from Rex he did not have the right to take. Rex eventually understood. They have continued to live in the same world. By most expectations, the show is building between them an ending that costs something from each. The dark version is that one of them dies for the other. The hopeful version is that they reconcile in a way that is so understated, the audience misses it the first time. Either way, the suggestion is that the show has been telling you, since the beginning, that the most disposable-looking character is the one being preserved for the heaviest weight. And the moment he picks it up, the show will change shape. Rex Splode is going to be the show's most important sacrifice. The 18th conspiracy looks at a body in space and asks whether it stays down. Conquest is the show's purest expression of Viltrumite cruelty. He fights for the joy of fighting. He laughs while he kills. He breaks Mark in a way Mark was not prepared for, and the show stages their fight as a turning point in Mark's understanding of what the Empire actually is. The fan view is that Conquest is not dead, or, more precisely, that even when the show appears to put him down for good, he is the kind of character the show cannot afford to leave on a shelf. The first thread is biological. Viltrumites are extraordinarily hard to kill. The show has been honest about this. Conquest is a senior soldier in the Empire's regard, presumably with regenerative capacity that exceeds what younger Viltrumites can manage. The argument is that whatever the show appears to do to him, the Empire has the technology to bring him back, and that he is going to be one of the bodies the Empire dusts off when it is finally ready to commit to a planetary invasion of Earth. The second thread is psychological. Mark's fight with Conquest is not a fight Mark wins cleanly. He survives it. He grows from it. He becomes more dangerous than he was before. The argument is that the show is going to bring Conquest back because Mark's growth as a fighter only matters if it is tested by the same opponent who broke him the first time. The conspiracy of the rematch is that the show has been holding Conquest in reserve, the same way it has been holding Thragg in reserve, as a symbol of the part of Mark that has not yet earned the right to call itself stronger. The third reading is a fan favorite. It says that Conquest is one of the few Viltrumites who would be most useful as an ally in a final war because his cruelty is so unblinking it would terrify even his own side if he switched. Some viewers suggest that the show might eventually turn him, that Conquest's love of fighting is so pure it could be redirected against the Empire if the Empire ever displeased him, that he could become a wild card on the Coalition's side in a way no one would predict. None of this is in the show on screen. All of it is built from the way the writers have stitched his character. The thought is not that the writers have decided what to do with him, it is that they have not yet been willing to delete him from the board, because they know he might still have a part to play. and the audience watches for the moment he re-enters, because Conquest is every villain who refuses to be put away. He has been beaten. He has not been finished. And the difference between those two facts is, in the long run of Invincible, the most important difference there is. The 19th conspiracy moves the camera all the way out, past Mars, past the Empire's most recent skirmishes, and into the slow assemblage of a galactic alliance the show keeps treating like a side plot. The coalition of planets is supposed to be a unified resistance to Viltrumite expansion, made up of species who have lost worlds to the Empire and species who are afraid they will. The fan suspicion is that the coalition is much less unified than it presents itself as, and that the politics behind its operation are more cynical and more compromised than the show has been willing to show on screen. The first thread is membership. How many of the species in the coalition are there because they want to fight the Empire, and how many are there because they want to be next to whichever power is going to win? The argument is that a meaningful percentage of the coalition's members are hedging, that they are sending resources both ways, that they are present at meetings because being present is cover for what they are doing elsewhere. A second thread is leadership. Theatis, as mentioned earlier, may have ties to the Empire that he has not been forthcoming about. Some fans argue this is not a one-off problem. There may be other senior officials in the coalition whose backgrounds are quietly inconsistent with the cause they claim, and the silence around those backgrounds may not be entirely innocent. The third thread is military. The coalition has been depicted as a force capable of standing against the Empire, but the show is also honest about the fact that the Empire has been stronger for centuries. The reading is that the coalition's actual fighting strength is far smaller than its membership suggests, that most of its members have small fleets and small armies, that the muscle behind the alliance comes from a few species, and that the loss of any one of them would collapse the entire coalition into chaos. Alan is one of those few. Mark, if he can be persuaded to fight openly on the coalition's side, would be another. The further claim is that the coalition has been treating Earth as a strategic objective for longer than the show has admitted, that the friendship Mark has built with Alan is, in part, a recruitment campaign run by Theatis, and that the coalition's apparent generosity in extending the offer is a tactical investment. The fourth thread connects this back to Cecil. The agency has not been blind to galactic politics, even when the show has not put galactic politics in the foreground. The argument is that Cecil has been in contact with the coalition, or with its functional equivalent, for longer than the show has shown, that there are quiet diplomatic arrangements between Earth's defense agency and off-world powers that have nothing to do with Mark's friendships, and that the slow extension of Mark's reach into galactic affairs has been a Cecil move as much as a Mark move. The coalition's true nature, the argument goes, is one of necessary alliances rather than shared values, that none of the species involved entirely trust each other, and that the war against the Empire is going to be won, if it is won, by alliances that include people who would otherwise be enemies. The deeper reading is that this is the show's argument about geopolitics. There are no clean alliances in a long war. Anyone who tells you their coalition is built on principle is selling you a story. The suggestion is that the show is going to make Mark, eventually, have to choose between accepting the messiness of how the coalition actually works and walking away from the only force in the galaxy that can hold the Empire at bay. The argument here is that the show has been preparing him for that compromise for years, and that Mark's eventual willingness to accept the help of allies he does not like is going to be one of the quiet pivots that determines whether his story ends well. The 20th conspiracy involves a smaller-scale alien race that the show treats almost as a recurring joke, and underneath the joke there is a strange and lasting horror. The Flaxans are a species who attempt to invade Earth through a portal that opens in a public space and immediately discovers, the first time it happens, a fundamental rule that breaks them. Time runs at a different rate on Earth than it does in their dimension. The fan suspicion is that the show is doing more with this than it admits. The first thread is what the time differential actually means for the Flaxans. Every time they cross into Earth, they grow old within minutes, and what looks to Earth like a short skirmish is, on their side of the portal, a long generational war. The argument is that the Flaxans are not stupid for trying again. They are desperate. They have lost generations to this rule. They have spent more biological time fighting Earth than Earth has spent fighting them, and they are going to keep trying because every loss on their side is a loss they cannot afford. The second thread is more disturbing. If time runs faster on the Flaxan side, what does Earth look like from inside their dimension? The view among careful fans suggests that the Flaxans have constructed entire centuries of analysis of Earth, that they have models, predictions, simulations, an obsessive cultural understanding of a planet they cannot quite reach. From their side, Earth is mythology. The Flaxen archives, somewhere in their world, contain more accurate information about Earth's history than any human institution does, because the Flaxens have had time to study it that humans have not. The third thread turns the time differential into a strategic resource. There are fan theories that the Empire knows about the Flaxen dimension and has been using it to incubate weapons. The reading is that an asset moved into the Flaxen side ages quickly, that the Empire could in principle put a soldier or a piece of technology there for a few of our hours and pull it back as a hardened veteran. The Flaxen space, in this argument, is not just a quirk. It is a tool that someone with the right intelligence could use to break the rules of a long war. The fourth thread is the most unsettling. If a person were sent there long enough, what would they become? There is a suspicion that the show is going to use Flaxen time, eventually, to age a character into a wisdom or a damage that the main timeline could not generate. The audience watches for the moment a familiar face comes back wrong. The thought is that the show has been seeding the Flaxen dimension as a place where transformations can happen that would not be possible elsewhere. Whether or not the writers ever fully pay it off, the rule is there. Time runs differently, and every time the show invokes the rule, it is reminding you that the universe of Invincible has corners where the basic physics do not apply, and that those corners are owned by people who have had a lot more time to plan than you have. The 21st conspiracy belongs to a man with a grudge so large, the show treats it almost as physics. Powerplex is one of the most painful characters in the show, because his grievance is, in important ways, justified. He is a man whose family was killed in the crossfire of a fight between heroes and villains, and he has dedicated his life to making Mark, the hero called Invincible, pay for being part of the destruction that took everything from him. The show is careful to give him sympathy. The argument fans extract from him is that the show is also using him to make a much wider point about superhero collateral damage that viewers have been picking up on for years. The first thread is the body count. Across the run of the show, how many civilians have died in the wake of Mark's fights? The view is that the number is much higher than the show has ever depicted on screen, that the writers have made a deliberate choice not to dwell on every casualty because to do so would change the genre, and that the moments when the show does name the number, indirectly, are scattered through dialogue as breadcrumbs. Mark's career, by any honest accounting, has been catastrophic for the people who happen to live in the places he was needed. A second thread is what the agency does about it. Cecil's organization, in the fan reading, runs a substantial reparations operation, with entire departments dedicated to managing the families of victims, where non-disclosure agreements are signed, and homes are bought and reputations are repaired, and where the reason most of the people Mark has indirectly hurt do not appear on screen is that they have been quietly compensated into silence. Powerplex is the one who did not accept the deal. He is the case that escaped the protocol. The suggestion is that there are others like him out there, that the show could, if it wanted to, build entire seasons around quiet enemies created by the same incidents, and that the writers are holding that material in reserve. The third thread is more thematic. The show uses Powerplex to make Mark, and the audience, sit with the moral cost of superhero violence in a way that the genre rarely demands. By most readings, the show is, very slowly, building toward a moment where Mark has to admit publicly that he is not blameless. The Powerplex confrontation, the way the show stages it, is set up as the moment where Mark cannot lie to himself. He did the damage. Someone died because he was fighting. He cannot give that life back. The view is that the show is using Powerplex as the rehearsal for a much bigger reckoning, and that when the reckoning comes, all the small Powerplex-shaped wounds the show has been quietly tracking will return at once. The fourth thread is the saddest. It says that Powerplex is right, in a way the show cannot let him be right out loud, and that Mark Grayson, even with the best intentions in the world, is the kind of person whose presence in a city is a guarantee that some specific family will lose someone they love. The audience in this reading is being prepared to accept this, not as villainy, not as failure, as the price of having a god in a costume living among you, and the show is preparing the moment when Mark has to look that price in the face and decide what to do with the rest of his life. The 22nd conspiracy is a meta one, and it sits between the show and its source material, like a translator who is not sure which direction to lean. The Invincible comic ran for years, told a complete story with a beginning and an end, and built an enormous cast that the show has been picking through carefully. The fan suspicion is that the show is not going to be a faithful adaptation, and that the divergences have been deliberate and accumulating since Season 1. The first thread is structural. The comic moved at a different pace than the show. Events that took years to set up in the comic have been compressed into the show, and events that took a single issue have been expanded into entire arcs. The argument is that the writers are using this compression and expansion to make the show feel like a different story, even when the events are technically the same. A second thread is character. There are characters in the comic the show has not introduced yet, and there are characters the show has introduced earlier than the comic did. The reading is that the writers have a short list of characters they intend to keep faithful to, and another short list of characters they intend to redirect entirely, and the second list is longer than fans expect. The third thread is plot. There are events at the end of the comic, in particular events involving Thragg, events involving Mark's children, events involving Mark's older self, that may not happen in the show at all. The argument is that the show is going to swerve significantly in its later seasons, that there are arcs the writers have decided are not televisable, and that some of the most famous moments from the comic will be substituted with new moments the show invents for itself. The fourth thread is the broader one. By most readings, the show is using comic familiarity to make audiences think they know what is coming, and then surprise them, that the writers have been counting on a portion of the audience having read the comic, and that the writers are positioning surprises specifically to overturn comic readers' expectations. This is a delicate game. Done well, it gives longtime fans of the comic and new viewers of the show different experiences of the same event, both of which are valid. Done poorly, it splits the audience into camps who do not trust each other to evaluate the show. The view is that the writers have been threading this needle carefully, and that the most divisive moments of the show have been calibrated specifically to give comic readers a different shock than new viewers receive. The fifth thread is the smallest and the most interesting. It is the suggestion that the show has been quietly seeding its own original elements, things that do not appear in the comic at all, into the run of the story, and that these original elements are going to become more important as the show moves further from its source. By the time the final season airs, the show will have invented a fairly substantial amount of new continuity, and the ending will not be the comic's ending, even if it shares some of the comic's beats. The audience watches for the show's first fully original major character. The audience watches for the show's first fully original major event. The argument is that they are already happening, in the cracks between scenes, and that the writers are going to bring them forward when the comic structure starts to constrain them. The Invincible adaptation is, in this reading, less an adaptation than a remix, and the remix is the one the writers wanted to make all along. The 23rd Conspiracy is built on real-world events, and it has to be handled carefully because real people are involved. The voice cast of Invincible has changed during the run of the show, in ways that the show has not explained on screen. Some characters have been recast between seasons without a public diegetic reason. Other characters who were heavily promoted in early episodes have appeared less than fans expected. The fan reading, kept within the bounds of what can be honestly stated, is that production realities, scheduling realities, and creative realities have all played roles in shaping the voice cast you hear in each season, and that the audience has been responding to these changes the way audiences usually respond, with theories. The first thread is whether certain casting choices reflect creative direction or contract negotiation. The honest answer is that both can be true, and that the show has not given the public a clean answer in every case. The fan suspicion is that the writers have, sometimes, written around availability problems by writing characters out, writing characters in, or repositioning who carries certain scenes. The audience can often feel this when they rewatch episodes. There are scenes where a character whose role was reduced is conspicuously absent, and there are scenes where a character who was added later is given disproportionate screen time. A second thread is what the recasting communicates about the show's plans for those characters. Recasting a character does not always mean the character will be diminished. Sometimes it means the character is being repositioned for a different arc. Fans can sometimes guess what is coming for a character by paying attention to who is voicing them in a new season. The third thread is more general. Animated shows live and die by their voice casts, and Invincible has assembled one of the largest celebrity voice ensembles in modern animation. The argument is that the scale of the cast has, at times, been more than the production could comfortably sustain, and that the schedule pressures of getting that many people into a booth has shaped the way some episodes are structured. Internally, the show has been a logistical project of a complexity the audience does not see. The behind-the-scenes work to keep that many actors available, to keep that many lines current, to keep that many performances aligned, has been one of the show's quiet feats of effort. The fourth thread is creative. There have been moments in the show where the writers seem to have responded to public reaction. The reading is that the writers are not in an isolated room, that they read the conversation around the show, and that their long-term plans have, at times, been adjusted in response to what audiences notice. The show is more responsive than it presents itself as. Whether this is a good thing depends on what you think a writer's job is. Some audiences want pure auteur authority. Other audiences want responsiveness. Invincible has been calibrating between these expectations carefully, and the result is a show that feels more deliberate than it sometimes actually is. The fifth thread is the most respectful and the most accurate. It is the recognition that everything you hear on screen is the product of decisions made by people with families and schedules and competing projects. The show is a collaboration, and the seams of that collaboration are visible if you look. The respect the show pays its voice cast is mostly off-screen, in the way it writes for them, the way it accommodates their availability, the way it brings them in for special moments. By the standards of an animated production at this scale, it is well run, and the small inconsistencies fans notice are evidence of how much work is being done to keep the larger thing coherent. The 24th conspiracy belongs to a creature the size of a building. Battle Beast is the most physically intimidating fighter the show has put on screen outside of the Viltrumites themselves, and the show treats him almost as a force of nature. He is a tiger-faced warrior who lives, he says, for combat, who has spent his life looking for a fight worthy of his strength. The fan reading is that the show is not telling you the full story of Battle Beast, and that his presence in the run is a longer setup than his episodes so far have suggested. The first thread is his origin. The show has been vague about exactly what world he is from, what species he represents, what culture produced him. The argument is that Battle Beast is from a planet the Empire has either conquered or destroyed, that his obsession with combat is a survival response, and that his apparent simplicity hides a deep grief about a home he no longer has. The second thread is his real power level. The show has shown him absorb damage that would shatter most opponents the run has introduced, and he has fought the Immortal in encounters that left the Immortal in pieces. The view is that Battle Beast is, in raw physical terms, near the top of the show's power tier, and that the only reason he has not won the fights he is in is that the show has not yet put him in the right one. There is a fight coming for him, a fight that the show has been pointing him toward for seasons, and when he finds it, the audience will see a side of him that has not yet been on screen. The third thread is his loyalty. Battle Beast has worked with various villains over the show's run, and his loyalty is famously cheap. He works for whoever pays in fights. The fan claim is that there is an alliance coming, in which Battle Beast switches sides, not out of conscience, but out of curiosity, that the Empire and the Resistance will both try to recruit him, and that whichever side gives him the better promise of glorious combat will win him. The fourth thread is the most personal. There is a reading among fans that Battle Beast and Mark, eventually, become something between rivals and friends, that the show is building a long arc in which Mark is the only fighter on Earth Battle Beast respects, and that the final result of that respect is going to be a moment that surprises the audience. Battle Beast, despite his appetite for cruelty, may be one of the show's most honest characters, because he is incapable of lying about what he wants. He wants a fight. He wants to lose to someone who deserves to win. The suggestion is that he is going to find that, eventually, and that the moment he does, is going to be one of the show's quietest tragedies. He will have what he wanted, he will not survive it, and the audience will be left with a strange kind of grief for a character who, all along, was trying to find the death he could be proud of. The 25th conspiracy hides on a college campus. In a basement laboratory, the show makes you feel guilty for noticing. Dr. D.A. Sinclair, the young researcher who originally engineered the Reanimen technology and the show's continuity, is presented as a scientist with no moral guardrails and a brilliant understanding of how to repurpose human bodies. He is caught. He is sent down a chain of consequences that, in the show, takes him in unexpected directions. The fan reading is that Sinclair is much more important to the long-term story than his early appearances suggest, and that the show has been quietly building him into a permanent fixture of its scientific underworld. The first thread is whether Sinclair acted alone. Most fans suspect that no graduate student of his demonstrated skill could have built what he built without infrastructure, that the equipment he had access to was not the equipment a university would provide, and that he was being funded or supplied by someone whose name the show has been keeping out of frame. The suggestion is that the agency itself, in some accidental or deliberate way, was the source. Cecil's organization had a research program. The research program had grants. The grants had targets. By this reading, Sinclair was one of those targets without knowing it, The funding for his most disturbing work came from accounts the agency quietly maintained, and when the agency later absorbed the technology, it was not the first time they had seen it. The second thread is what Sinclair did to the people he experimented on. The show is honest about the broad strokes. He took bodies. He modified them. He made monsters. The dark version is that the bodies he took were not all dead when he started, that the line between victim and patient blurred in his lab the way it blurs in the worst chapters of real medical history, and that the show has not shown you the worst of his work because the show could not legally or ethically air it. The third thread is what happens to Sinclair himself across the run. He is a man whose punishment, in the show, becomes a kind of dark thematic mirror of the violence he committed. The argument is that the show is using him as a personal allegory for what the agency does to people on a larger scale. What Sinclair did in a basement, Cecil does to bodies in a clean lab. The difference is the lighting. The show is asking the audience to notice the parallel and to refuse to look away from it. The fourth thread is what becomes of him. There are fan theories that Sinclair is going to re-emerge in later seasons as a transformed version of himself, that the punishment he undergoes does not break him, that he comes back into the story, carrying a new understanding of his own work and a new willingness to be honest about it. In the long run, Sinclair becomes one of the show's strangest collaborators, a man whose crimes were so specific that the only person who can undo them is him, and a man whose return to the story is going to be played as a complicated, almost reluctant redemption. The view is that the show has been building this slowly, the way it builds most of its long arcs, and that when Sinclair reappears, it is going to be quieter than the audience expects, more inward, more wounded. The Sinclair reading is, in the end, a small one, but it is connected to almost every larger one. He is the door through which the Reanimen entered the show. He is the access point for the body politics that drive everything from Robot's reveal to Donald's existence. And the show keeps coming back to him, because it knows it has not finished telling his story. The 26th conspiracy involves an Earth that is more politically restless than the show's surface plotting lets on, and it is carried by a man whose mask looks like a piece of geology. Doc Seismic is, on paper, an eco-terrorist with the power to manipulate seismic energy. He is presented as a recurring threat, a man with a cause that the show treats as both sincere and dangerous. The fan reading is that Doc Seismic is not the only person in the show's world who believes what he believes, and that there is an entire shadow movement on Invincible's Earth that the show has been hinting at without fully depicting. The first thread is that Doc Seismic is correct about something the show is afraid to confirm. The Earth in Invincible is being shaped, every day, by forces that ordinary humans cannot resist. Heroes fight gods in their streets. Aliens land in their suburbs. The Empire's incursions damage infrastructure no one ever explains the rebuilding of. The argument is that Doc Seismic represents the political position of millions of people in the world of the show who have decided they have had enough, and that the only reason the show does not dramatize that political position more thoroughly is that doing so would be a different show. A second thread is that Doc Seismic has allies. The view is that there is a network of small radical groups across the world of Invincible, that they share resources, that they coordinate occasionally, and that the show has been quietly seeding them in the background of crowd scenes for seasons. The audience can sometimes spot the signs that a particular flag in a background scene or a particular slogan on a wall is a call-out to a faction that has not been formally introduced. The third thread is more disturbing. It says that Doc Seismic, and people like him, are sometimes used by the agency, that Cecil has been known to look the other way when a particular hero's bad press would be useful, and that there are entire chapters of Earth's recent history in the show where the agency has effectively allowed acts of political violence to happen because the consequences advance the agency's larger goals. The dark reading is that the moral architecture of Invincible's Earth is darker than its visual style suggests, that there is a quiet politics of permitted chaos underneath the colorful action, and that Doc Seismic survives partly because he is occasionally useful. The fourth thread is the future. Doc Seismic, or a successor to him, is going to be the figure who articulates, finally, the position of the Earth's resistance to the entire concept of having superheroes. The show has been thinking about this question since the first season. By most readings, the writers have not yet figured out how to dramatize it cleanly, and when they do, it will be one of the show's most uncomfortable arcs. The audience watches for the moment when an ordinary person speaks plainly to Mark about why they are afraid of him. The argument is that the moment is coming. Doc Seismic, in this reading, is the rehearsal. He is the cartoon version of the question. The real question, when the show is ready to ask it, will be quieter and harder to argue with. The 27th conspiracy belongs to a small group of villains whose name sounds like a punchline and whose actions are anything but. The Lizard League is presented to you as a B-tier crew of reptile-themed criminals who keep getting beaten. They are the sort of villains the show uses to demonstrate that Mark is not just up against gods and empires, he is also up against the strange recurring nuisances of small-time crime in a world that has too many people in costumes. The fan suspicion is that the Lizard League is more important than the show wants you to think, and that their persistence across seasons is the writer's quiet way of building infrastructure for something that has not yet emerged. The first thread is who funds them. The view is that the Lizard League is too well equipped and too frequently in motion to be operating on petty crime returns alone, that someone with serious resources is bankrolling their continued existence, and that the show has been hinting at this through the quality of the weapons they keep getting their hands on. There is an arms broker in the show's underground who has been quietly supplying half the recurring villains. This broker has never been named, and one season the show is going to finally pull the curtain back on a logistics operation that has been running unnoticed in plain sight. A second thread is what the Lizard League is rehearsing for. Their recurring schemes have a pattern. The argument runs that they keep targeting infrastructure of a particular kind, that their seemingly random attacks are, when you map them, pointing towards something specific. The Lizard League is in the early stages of a much larger plan. Their leader is more strategic than his theatrical presentation suggests, and the audience is going to look back, eventually, on episodes they treated as filler, and realize there were dots being connected the whole time. The third thread is the connection to the show's other villains. Komodo Dragon and the rest of the team have crossed paths with other recurring antagonists in ways that fans have cataloged. There is, by these accounts, an informal alliance, where small-time villains in Invincible's world know each other, share intelligence, occasionally work together. The argument is that the show has been seeding a villain coalition the same way the heroes have a coalition of planets, and that the moment the writers want a coordinated assault on a major city, the villain alliance will be ready. The fourth thread is the smallest and the most amusing. It is the suggestion that one of the Lizard League members is not actually a reptile-themed villain, but a deeply embedded undercover operative, that the agency has been running a long-term surveillance operation through the team, and that the reason the team keeps getting close to important plots without quite succeeding is that someone inside is feeding information to Cecil. This reading is built on small inconsistencies in their plans, on moments where their attacks fail in ways that seem too convenient. None of it is confirmed. All of it is the kind of long-term setup the show has shown itself willing to invest in. The conclusion is that the joke characters are not the joke. They are the punchline of a setup the audience has not noticed they are inside of, and one day the punchline is going to land. The 28th conspiracy belongs to a woman whose body keeps trying to outrun her mind. Monster Girl carries a curse. She is, the show tells you, an adult woman who has been trapped, sometimes, in the body of a child, and who transforms into a powerful monster when she uses her powers, and who ages backward every time she does. The premise is grim, the execution is sympathetic, and the show is careful with how it shows her. The fan view is that the show has been telling you, slowly, a much longer story about what the curse actually is and where it came from. The first thread is that the curse is older than the woman who carries it. The reading is that Monster Girl is not the first host, that the curse passes from carrier to carrier, that at some point in the show's history a previous bearer made a choice that ended the chain, or that the show is going to reveal a previous bearer whose existence reframes everything you have understood about her. The curse is, in some sense, a personality of its own. The monster she becomes is not just a transformation. It is a passenger. The dark reading is that the passenger has wishes, that the things she does in monster form are sometimes the passenger's choices rather than hers, and that the show has been very careful not to confirm this, because the audience would never trust her again if it did. A second thread is what the curse is actually for. There is a view that the curse exists as a kind of contract with a force the show has not yet explicitly named, that something somewhere benefits from the suffering it causes, and that breaking the curse means breaking a deal with an entity the show has been keeping off screen. This entity, fans suspect, exists in the same metaphysical space Damien Darkblood comes from, and that the curse is, in a real sense, a soul-level problem rather than a biological one. The third thread is what happens if she does not transform. The argument is that the curse, ignored long enough, would still find her. She cannot simply refuse to use her powers. The thing inside her would find another way to express itself. She has been managing it, with robots' help, more carefully than the show has depicted, and her stability across the run is the result of a private struggle she has never fully shared with the audience. The fourth thread connects her back to Robot, in a way that complicates both of their arcs. The reading is that Robot's interest in her was not, originally, romantic. It was scientific. He saw her as a research subject, that her curse was a problem he wanted to solve in the same way he wanted to solve his own body, and that the relationship that grew between them did so genuinely but on top of a foundation that was, at the start, exploitative. The dark version is that he has been studying her this whole time, that some of his most important breakthroughs have been built on observations of her transformation, and that she knows this and has chosen to accept it because the alternative is to lose the only person who can help her live with the curse. The Monster Girl reading is, in the end, about consent inside love, about whether a relationship that begins in study can become a relationship that ends in trust, about whether someone who has been observed can ever be sure they were also seen. The show plays the relationship as a love story. Fans suspect it is also something else, and that the something else is what makes their dynamic land as deeply as it does. The 29th conspiracy belongs to a small boy who is also, technically, an old man. Oliver Grayson is Mark's half-brother, the son of Nolan and Andressa, born on Thraxa, raised at an accelerated rate the way certain hybrid Viltrumites are. By the time you meet him as an active part of the story, he is a child who can talk like an adult, who has memories of his early years compressed into months, who looks at the world with the confused intensity of a being who has not been allowed the slow learning ordinary childhood provides. The fan view is that Oliver is the show's most important wild card, and that everything the writers have been doing with him is positioning him for a turn the audience is not going to be ready for. The first thread is what his accelerated growth actually means. The show has been clear that he ages faster than Mark did, and that his cognitive development is racing alongside his body. The argument is that the writers have been quietly tracking, in dialogue and visual cues, how mature Oliver is at any given moment, and that the version of Oliver who appears in later seasons is going to be biologically a teenager or older, even when the timeline of the show has only advanced a few months. The audience is going to be confronted with an Oliver who looks Mark's age, or older, before the show ends, and that the moment of that confrontation is going to be one of the show's more disorienting sequences. The second thread is what Oliver's politics are going to be. The view is that Oliver, having absorbed information at a rate no human can match, has developed views about the Empire, about Earth, about his father, that differ sharply from Mark's. The writers, fans suspect, have been quietly building Oliver into the family member who is going to argue, sincerely, for positions Mark cannot accept, and that the show's most important debate is going to take place between the two brothers when Oliver is old enough to have his own conclusions. The dark version of the reading is that Oliver, after enough exposure to the Viltrumite worldview, decides that there is something inside it worth preserving, and that he becomes a kind of accidental missionary for ideas Mark refuses. The show is going to make the audience feel the pull of those ideas through Oliver, because Oliver is young and innocent and persuasive in a way no soldier of the Empire could be. The third thread is what Oliver's powers are going to do. He is going to grow into a being whose capabilities outpace even Mark's, the argument runs, because the hybrid biology of his mother's species and his father's, combined with accelerated maturation, has produced something the Empire has been trying to engineer for centuries. Oliver, fully grown, is going to be the most powerful person on the board, and the question of which side he chooses is going to be the question that determines whether the war can be won at all. The fourth thread is the smallest and the most tender. The reading is that Oliver is going to be the one to forgive Nolan, not Mark. Mark has too much history. Oliver, who was raised partly by Nolan in a corner of the galaxy where Nolan was, for once gentle, may be the one who can extend the kind of grace the rest of the family cannot. Oliver's forgiveness is going to be the moment that breaks something open in Nolan, that the show has been holding this scene in reserve, and that when it arrives it will land with the kind of quiet weight the show is best at when it slows down. So the suspicion is that the small boy is, in fact, the lever the show is using to pivot the whole story. He looks like a side character. He is, by this reading, the eventual hinge of the Empire's downfall and the family's restoration. The 30th conspiracy looks outside the show entirely, into the strange shared universe that the creator of Invincible has built across multiple properties. Robert Kirkman, the writer behind Invincible's comic, has also been responsible for other long-running series, including the comic and television franchise that came to define a great deal of contemporary horror television. The fan suspicion is that these worlds may, in some carefully unspoken way, be connected. The first thread is the smallest and the most fun. There are cameos, Easter eggs, recurring background details that fans have spotted across Kirkman's work. None of them are confirmations of a shared universe. All of them are wink material, the kind of detail a writer plants because writers like to plant details, and that fans then take and build elaborate maps from. They are not confirmations, but they are not entirely jokes either. They are signals from a writer who has thought about the question of whether his worlds touch, and who has decided, mostly, to leave the question open. A second thread is more interesting. The argument goes that within the comic, certain background references suggest a wider world of weirdness in which other Kirkman properties could exist. The Invincible universe, after all, is a universe with multiverse travel, with parallel Earths, with realities that touch. By this reading, one of those parallel Earths is, somewhere, an Earth from another of Kirkman's projects. The dark version is that one or two of the show's odder moments are deliberate teases of this idea, and that the writers, if they wanted to, could push the show in a direction that crossed over with another world. The third thread is industrial. Kirkman's production company has been running multiple major animated and live-action shows simultaneously. There are creative through lines between these shows, the same instincts about violence and grief and family run through all of them, and watching them together produces a kind of unified worldview about what the writer believes about storytelling. The argument is that the audience can, by watching closely, derive a kind of authorial philosophy. The fourth thread is the most playful and the least falsifiable. It is the idea that Invincible's universe is, in some quiet way, the most expansive of all of Kirkman's worlds, and that the others can be fitted inside it. An Invincible viewer who also watches a Kirkman horror series can construct a kind of headcanon in which both shows are happening, in different corners of the same big setting, and the writer is gently encouraging this kind of viewing without ever insisting on it. Kirkman is a comic writer at heart, and comic writers love shared universes, and even if Invincible never explicitly visits one of his other worlds, the conceptual door has been left ajar. The fifth thread is the most respectful. It is the recognition that an author who has been working at this scale for this long has a worldview, and that worldview shows up in everything he touches. Invincible, in this reading, is not a standalone story. It is part of a writer's life work. And the suggestion is that the show, watched in the right mood, lets you feel the weight of that life work in the background of even its smallest scenes. The 31st Conspiracy stays with Adam Eve a little longer, because the show eventually gave her a standalone story that the audience treated, depending on which fan you ask, as a gift or as a leak. The Adam Eve-focused episode that the show released between its larger seasons took the audience through her childhood, her early experimentation with her powers, her relationship with her parents, her decision to step into the world of heroes. The fan reading is that the episode contained more information about the long-term direction of her character than the show usually offers, and that fans have been mining it for years. The first thread is the origin reframing. The episode reframes the question of where Eve's powers come from in ways that connect her not just to a personal accident or genetic anomaly, but to a project that involved decisions made by adults around her before she could understand them. The argument is that the show was using the special to plant, deliberately, the seed that her parents were complicit in producing the limits she now lives inside. The episode said, more or less plainly, that the version of Eve we know is a version her parents chose for her, and that the version she could have been is still in there somewhere. A second thread is the parental conflict. The episode treated her mother with a kind of careful, complicated portrait, presenting her not as a villain, but as a woman whose love was conditional and whose disappointment was constant. The reading among fans is that the show was painting a portrait that recurs across many of its female characters. Mothers in Invincible are often portrayed as carrying enormous weight, often inadequately supported, often making the wrong choices for the right reasons. The show is, very quietly, building a portrait of an entire generation of women in this universe who were given less than they should have been, and the children of those women carry the consequences. The third thread is the timeline within the special. There are moments in the episode that, on careful examination, do not quite line up with the chronology established by other seasons. Fans have parsed these moments as deliberate, as accidents, as evidence that the show is willing to let small chronological inconsistencies stand if they serve a thematic purpose. The timeline in the show is, in important ways, slightly elastic, and the writers have permitted themselves a kind of dream logic in the way the characters' lives unfold. The fourth thread is what the episode chose not to show. It deliberately stopped short of certain moments, certain consequences, certain reveals. The writers were marking out the territory they wanted to come back to in future seasons. The episode is a kind of map of unfinished Eve arcs, and fans who watched it closely can predict, with some accuracy, the moments the show is going to return to. The fifth thread is the most generous and the most accurate. It is that the episode existed because the writers loved this character, and that they wanted to give the audience time with her in a way that the main series structure does not always allow. The special is the show's gift, an honest exploration of a character who has been underwritten in the main run, and everything in it is canon precisely because the writers wanted it to be. The audience took it as such. The fan readings layered on top of it are, in many ways, doing the work the show has been hoping someone would do, the work of treating Eve as the central figure she always could have been. The 30-second conspiracy involves a woman who is many women, and the question of how many of her can fit into a single room. Duplicate has the power to create copies of herself, each of which is, by the show's own treatment, her, in the sense that she experiences each one's memories upon their dissolution, and that the singular continuous version of her is a kind of distributed self. The fan suspicion is that Duplicate's powers are described too cleanly by the show, that the philosophical implications of what she does have not been fully reckoned with, and that there are theories among fans about how her powers really work that complicate everything she has done across the run. The first thread is whether the copies are persons. The show treats them, mostly, as expendable, and Duplicate herself treats them with the casualness of a person treating her own fingers. The fan question is whether each copy, in its short life, has a private experience that the original does not absorb. If the experience does not transfer perfectly, then each copy is, in a real sense, an individual who lives and dies. Duplicate is, by this calculation, the most prolific killer of a kind on the show, killing thousands of versions of herself across her career, even if the version she returns to never feels the loss. The reading is dark and the show does not address it. Fans suspect the writers know the question and have chosen not to answer it because the answer would be unbearable. A second thread is which of the copies is the original. The answer, fans argue, is not as clean as Duplicate's confidence suggests. After enough years of duplication, the chain of consciousness has been broken and rebuilt many times, and the woman walking around as Duplicate today may not be biologically or experientially continuous with the woman who first manifested the power as a teenager. The dark version of this is that the original is dead, and that the version we know is a copy who simply does not remember being a copy. The third thread is about scale. Duplicate's upper limit has not been explored. She can clearly produce many copies. What happens if she produces hundreds, thousands? What is the constraint on her power, biologically or psychologically? The view is that the show has been quietly limiting her use of her power because the unlimited version of her power would be too useful, too disruptive to plot. In a desperate moment, she could flood a battlefield with herself. The Empire would have no real answer to a swarm of duplicated combatants of her quality, and the only reason she has not done this is that the writers cannot allow her to without ending fights too quickly. The fourth thread is the most poignant. Duplicate is in a relationship with Rex Splode, the volatile center of so many of the show's other quiet plots. The reading is that the relationship between them is shadowed by both their powers. Rex's destructive ability, Kate's expendable selves, both make their love story a meditation on impermanence in ways the show does not always make explicit. The writers have been preparing, for years, a sequence in which Kate and Rex have to make a choice together that costs them something that cannot be replaced. The shape of that choice changes depending on which fan you ask, but the suspicion is that it is coming, that the writers have not given Kate this much screen time and this much characterization just to leave her in the background, and that her duplication powers are going to be the mechanic of one of the most painful losses the show ever inflicts. The 33rd conspiracy is the most playful and the most numerous. It belongs to all the small details the show has placed in its background. The Easter eggs, the references, the inscriptions, the posters, the books on shelves, the names on doors. These are not background, they are signals. The first thread is the most often discussed. The show contains references to the comic that the show diverges from, and the references function as winks for readers of the comic and as planted clues for new viewers. Almost every episode of the show contains at least one detail that a comic reader will recognize and a non-comic reader will not, and the writers have been calibrating these references carefully. The audience that recognizes them is being told, indirectly, that the writers know what they are doing and that the divergences are deliberate. A second thread is the Easter eggs to other Kirkman properties. The writer's other works are quietly nodded to in the background of the show, as covered earlier, and careful viewers can collect a small but coherent set of references. These references reward a particular kind of attention without insisting on it. The third thread is the references to real-world events and figures. The show has, in its backgrounds, included references to actual landmarks, actual political figures in modified form, actual events the show is reacting to. The show is doing a quiet kind of cultural commentary that the audience could miss if they were not looking for it, and the writers have been more politically engaged in the small details than the surface plotting would suggest. The fourth thread is the technical one. Certain scenes in the show contain visual references to specific frames of the comic. The animators have, in certain pivotal moments, reproduced the panel layouts of the original artwork, and these reproductions are the writer's way of saying that even when they diverge, they remember the source. The show, in its visual language, is in conversation with the comic in a way that goes beyond mere adaptation. The fifth thread is the most affectionate. The writers have been planting personal jokes, the names of friends on doors, the books on shelves, the small details only the writers would recognize. The show is, in part, a private project, a labor of love that contains personal references the audience will never decode. The reason fans love the show with the intensity they do is, in part, that they can feel the personal investment in the background, even when they cannot identify the specific reference. The Easter egg reading is the reading of love. It is the recognition that the show was made by people who care about it, and that the care shows up everywhere if you look. The audience pauses on a background frame, finds a name on a poster, smiles. The show has done its job. The rewards for paying close attention are, in the long run, the reason fans return to it. The 34th conspiracy looks at the future of the family, and the suggestion that Mark and Eve are being walked, very slowly, toward a child who will outshine them both. The reading is built partly on the show's careful framing of their relationship across the run, partly on the comic's eventual revelations, and partly on the way the writers keep finding ways to put Eve's body and Mark's biology in the same emotional frame. The first thread is that the relationship between Mark and Eve was always the long-term endpoint the show was working toward. The view is that the show has been moving the pieces, season by season, to make this pairing inevitable, that the secondary romance with Amber existed in part to give Mark a relationship to fail at, that the eventual movement of Mark toward Eve was a structure the writers worked out before the first episode aired. The audience watching them slowly orbit each other is watching a deliberate engineering of romantic narrative, and the eventual moment of their getting together is, in storytelling terms, a planned destination. A second thread is about the child. The argument is that the writers have already decided who Mark and Eve's daughter is, what she becomes, how she shapes the second half of the run. Fans argue that the daughter is going to be, biologically, the most powerful single being the show has yet produced. Half Viltrumite, half whatever Eve is, which is itself extraordinary. Born to two parents whose powers were already off the charts, the suggestion is that the daughter is going to be a being whose existence rewrites the rules of the conflict, and that the audience is going to be asked, eventually, to follow her story for an arc the way they have followed Mark's. The dark version of the reading is that the daughter is also a target. The Empire would want her. Cecil would want to oversee her upbringing. The Coalition would want to recruit her. The Sequids would want to host her. Every player on the board has a reason to be interested in a child of that lineage. The show is going to put that child in danger from the moment she is born, and her childhood is going to be one of the central tragedies of the late run. The third thread is about Eve's pregnancy itself. The argument is that the body of a person with Eve's powers carrying a Viltrumite hybrid is not a normal pregnancy, that the gestation involves complications the show has not depicted yet, that Eve's powers and the child's powers may interact in dangerous ways. The writers are going to use the pregnancy as the slow-motion crisis around which an entire season is shaped, and the audience is going to spend that season afraid. The fourth thread is what the child means for Mark's relationship with his father. The reading is that becoming a father changes Mark's understanding of Nolan in ways that the show has been carefully building toward. Mark, holding his own daughter, is going to see, for the first time, why Nolan hesitated when he should have killed his son. The moment of Mark holding his daughter is the moment where his rage at his father is replaced by something more complicated, and this complication is the emotional climax the show has been quietly engineering. The fifth thread is the most reaching. The argument is that the daughter is the show's true protagonist, in the long run. That Invincible is a multi-generational story, whose first half is Mark's, and whose second half belongs to her. The writers know this, and they have been planting her arrival the way Mark's arrival was planted in the title of the original comic. Invincible was named for a feeling. The feeling can be passed down. The show, by its end, is going to convince the audience that the title belongs to her, and the audience by then will be ready for it. The 35th conspiracy is the most emotionally difficult to hold in your hand. It belongs to Nolan Grayson, and it asks the question fans cannot quite agree on. Is Nolan's redemption real? From the moment he leaves Earth after the catastrophe of the first season, the show begins to do something unusual. It gives him a second life. It puts him on another planet. It lets him love again. It gives him a son. It places him in a position where he has to defend a population from his own former employers. And it lets the audience watch a man who killed every member of his original team try to do something different. The fan reading is split, almost evenly, between two views. The first is that Nolan is genuinely changing, that the choice he makes to defend Thraxa is the beginning of an arc in which he becomes one of the show's most morally interesting characters, and that the version of him you meet by the later seasons is, in some meaningful way, a different person than the one who killed the Guardians. The second view is darker. It says that Nolan does not change. It says that what he does on Thraxa is not a moral reformation, but a personal preference, that he simply finds another place he can love, that the Empire is still in him, that the same Nolan who would have raised Mark to be a conqueror is still inside the Nolan who tries to be a father to Oliver. By many fan accounts, the show is letting both views coexist on purpose. The first thread that follows from this is what the show actually believes about evil. The writers, the argument runs, are not confident that a person can change after committing the kind of violence Nolan committed, but they are also not willing to write him off entirely. Nolan is, in some sense, the show's open-ended question, and the audience is being asked to decide for themselves whether his attempts at being better are penance, performance, or something genuine. A second thread is what his attempted reconciliation with Mark really is. Nolan, when he reaches out to his son, is operating from a mix of regret and self-interest. He wants to see Mark again because he loves him. He also wants to see Mark again because Mark is, biologically, his most important son, and the future of his family runs through that bond. Even Nolan cannot fully separate his emotions from his evolutionary instincts. The argument suggests that the love he feels is real, but is also entangled with the Empire's logic he was raised inside. The conversation between Nolan and Mark, when it finally takes place, is one of the most carefully written scenes the show has ever produced, precisely because it cannot resolve cleanly. The third thread is what happens to Nolan in the long run. Fans are split between those who think the show is going to let him die heroically and those who think the show is going to keep him alive precisely because his survival is more painful for everyone involved. The writers know which choice they intend to make, and the foreshadowing is already in the show for the careful viewer to track. The dark version is that the show will have to kill him, because anything less would feel like an evasion of the weight he carries. The hopeful version is that the show will let him live, because doing so is the more honest representation of how rare and how incomplete redemption actually is in real life. The suspicion is that the writers have been writing toward both endings, leaving themselves room to choose. The fourth thread is what Nolan represents in the broader argument of the show. Nolan is the show's central case study in the question of whether power and violence can be untangled. He has the power. He used the violence. He claims to be sorry. The show is using him to make a long argument about what apology actually requires, what penance actually looks like, and what we, as audiences, are willing to accept from a character we once watched commit unspeakable acts. There is no clean answer. There is not supposed to be a clean answer. Nolan is the show's living wound, and the fact that fans cannot agree on what to do with him is the proof that the writers have done their job. The 36th conspiracy returns to Angstrom Levy, and to a single confrontation that becomes, in fan readings, the most important inflection point in the show's middle stretch. The attack Angstrom launches at a family gathering, the violence that breaks out around Mark, the way the day spirals from a small, ordinary scene into something that nearly ends multiple lives, is one of the show's most carefully constructed sequences. The argument is that this scene was not just a violent set piece, it was the writers laying out, in concentrated form, every theme they intended to develop in the seasons that followed. The first thread is what Angstrom really wanted that day. The show presents him as out for revenge against Mark. By most readings, Angstrom's actual goal was more complicated, that he was trying to make a statement to himself as much as to Mark, that he was testing whether the version of him that emerged from the failed merger procedure was capable of the kind of action his combined consciousness believed was just. Before that day, Angstrom had not yet committed to being a villain. He was rehearsing it, and the show's framing of his hesitation, brief as it is the writers telling you that he could have stopped. He chose not to. A second thread is what was hidden in the violence. The scene contained, in its background details, planted information that has not yet been paid off. Specific names mentioned, specific objects damaged, specific bystanders glimpsed. The writers have set up future arcs in the wreckage of this day, and the audience is going to look back, eventually, and realize that someone who became important to the run was first introduced in the corner of a frame from that confrontation. The third thread is the message the show was sending about Mark. This is the day Mark stops being a young hero and starts being a man capable of the kind of fury that frightens his own friends. The writers were marking, in this scene, the moment when Mark's relationship to violence changed permanently. The version of him that fought before this day was a young man trying to live up to a father he could not match. The version of him that fights after this day is a young man who has decided, against his own will, that there are people he will kill. The fourth thread is what the day cost the people around him. The day's casualties extend further than the show has yet depicted. In this reading, that there were people present whose stories did not get told because the show needed to keep its focus on Mark, and that those uncounted casualties are part of the load of grief Mark carries through later seasons. The show is going to come back to this confrontation, eventually, and tell the audience whose lives were broken in the background while the camera stayed on Mark. The fifth thread is the question that hangs over the entire scene. Was the day Cecil's failure or Cecil's design? Cecil could have intervened earlier, fans argue. His surveillance system would have flagged Angstrom's preparation, and the reason he did not move sooner was strategic. Cecil was, in some uncomfortable way, willing to let the day happen because it accomplished something he wanted accomplished. It hardened Mark. It demonstrated, to anyone watching, what Mark could do under pressure. It created a recruitment opportunity for new heroes. The dark version is that Cecil's failure was deliberate, that he sacrificed people he was supposed to protect for a longer game, and that this is the day the audience should have started not trusting him quite so completely. The show is, eventually, going to make the audience confront this. The Angstrom attack was not a tragedy that happened to Mark. It was a tragedy that was allowed to happen around him, by people whose authority he was not yet willing to question. And the questioning, when it comes, is going to start with that day. The 37th conspiracy walks down into the basements of the Global Defense Agency campus and asks the question fans have been quietly asking from the first episode: what is Cecil keeping down there? The show has shown you, across its run, fragments of the underground complex. There are vaults, there are labs, there are corridors that lead to facilities that have not been named. The fan suspicion is that the parts you have seen are a small fraction of what is actually there. The first thread is the body inventory. Cecil maintains, in cold storage, the preserved bodies of major threats that he has neutralized but not destroyed. Aliens whose biology might be useful later. Heroes who died in the line of duty and whose remains are being kept for resurrection options. Villains whose technology is integrated with their flesh in ways that cannot be separated. The basement, fans suspect, contains the largest non-public collection of dangerous biology on Earth, and the audience has only been shown the smallest possible glimpse. A second thread is the technology archive. Cecil has acquired, across decades of running the agency, a vast archive of weapons, gadgets, devices, ships, materials that have been recovered from incidents the agency has handled. Most of them have never been studied because the agency does not have the personnel. Many of them are dangerous in ways the agency does not fully understand. The basement is a small museum of unknown threats, and one of the recurring quiet fears of the show is that something in the archive is going to be activated at the wrong time. The third thread is the personnel archive. Cecil has files on everyone, not just heroes and villains, but ordinary people whose lives have touched the superhuman world in ways the agency has decided to monitor. Family members of heroes, childhood friends of villains, witnesses to events the agency has covered up. The basement contains a surveillance infrastructure that would dwarf any real-world intelligence agency, and the audience has been told this in pieces without ever being shown the full scope. The fourth thread is the cell block. The agency holds prisoners that the public has been told are dead. People the agency could not safely release, but could not legally hold openly. There are cells, deep in the basement, occupied by figures the show has not yet revealed. And one of the late-stage twists of the run is going to be a prison break in which the audience meets, all at once, the the population Cecil has been hiding. The fifth thread is the kill switch. Cecil maintains, somewhere in the lowest level, a single weapon capable of ending any superhuman on Earth. The argument is that the weapon is not a single device but a network of fail-safes, that each major hero on Earth has been quietly equipped with a vulnerability Cecil can exploit, and that the moment any of them turns truly against him, he has the means to act. The dark version is that Cecil keeps the kill switches because he genuinely fears them more than he loves them. He is, fundamentally, a man who cannot trust gods, who lives among them every day, and whose entire career has been a long calibration of how to manage beings he cannot personally defeat. The basement is the proof. Whatever Mark eventually becomes, Cecil has been preparing for it since before Mark could fly. The 38th conspiracy is the largest of all, because it is about the show itself, about the end the writers are building toward, about the shape of an arc that has not yet fully revealed itself. The endgame question is what fans have been arguing about for years, and the reading is, in many cases, a synthesis of every other conspiracy in this list. The first thread is the war. The show is building toward a final, planetary, multi-front war that involves the Viltrumite Empire, the coalition of planets, the Sequids, the Flaxens, the various Earth-based resistance movements, and the agency all at the same time. The show is going to do this, fans believe. It has the budget and the will to do it, and the audience is going to be asked to keep track of more simultaneous storylines in the final season than the show has ever attempted before. A second thread is who survives. The show has been quietly planting hints about which characters are going to live and which are going to die. Particular arcs read as preparing them for sacrifice. Rex Splode, as discussed. The Immortal, almost certainly. Several of the older heroes whose arcs are clearly winding down. Robot, in some readings, depending on whose body he is in by then. The show has been writing toward a kind of generational changing of the guard, and the final season is going to be marked by the deaths of multiple figures the audience has come to love. The third thread is who replaces them. Oliver, Eve, Mark, and the new generation of heroes are going to inherit a world that has been substantially emptied by the war. The show is going to use this generational shift to make an argument about responsibility, about whether the young people inheriting a broken world can do better than the people who broke it. The dark version is that the show is going to be honest about the answer being no, and that the inheritance is going to come with the recognition that the next generation is not going to fix what the previous one ruined. The fourth thread is the long-term shape of Mark's role. The reading, drawing on the comic but also on the show's slow modifications of the comic, is that Mark is going to take on a position of considerable galactic responsibility before the end, that he is going to become, by whatever name the show eventually gives him, the most important political figure in this universe. The show has been preparing him for this through every defeat. The losses have not been distractions, they have been training. The fifth thread is the most philosophical. The show is going to land, in its final episodes, on a thesis about what heroism actually is in a universe like this one. The writers do not yet have a fully settled answer, the suspicion is, but they are working toward one, and the question of whether Mark, by the end, is more honest than his father is going to be, the question the show stakes everything on. The show will, finally, give the audience an answer. Not a triumphant one, not a defeated one, a complicated, hard-earned, costly one. The kind of answer a long-running story can earn the right to deliver only by surviving the years that produced it. Invincible is going to stick the landing. The hope is hopeful because the audience needs it to be. And the suspicion, in the end, is that the writers know what they owe the audience and are going to deliver it. The 39th conspiracy belongs to a room in Washington that the show only occasionally takes you into, and to the people inside it whose names you may not catch. The Earth of Invincible has a political establishment. It has elected officials. It has a Pentagon. It has agencies, civilian and military, that predate the agency Cecil runs, and that have not stopped existing simply because his office became the public face of superhuman policy. The fan suspicion is that there is an entire political conflict the show has been hinting at and rarely depicting directly, in which Cecil's agency is one player among several, and in which the others have been quietly resenting his authority for years. The first thread is that there are senators, generals, intelligence officials, who believe the agency has been operating with insufficient oversight, and who have been working behind the scenes to bring it under tighter control. The show has been showing you, in glimpses, the political faces of this resistance, that certain recurring background figures in scenes set in government buildings are pieces of a long-term subplot the writers have not yet fully connected. One of these figures is going to step into the foreground in a later season and force a public reckoning with the agency's methods. A second thread is the international one. The world's other major powers have superhuman programs of their own. The fan reading suggests that they have been watching the American agency with a mixture of envy and alarm, and that the show has been deliberately keeping these programs off-screen so that their eventual reveal will carry weight. There are heroes in other countries, working for other agencies, whose existence the show has not yet introduced, and whose introduction is going to change the political balance of the world. The dark version is that some of these foreign programs are more morally compromised than the American agency, and that some are less, and that Mark's relationships with foreign heroes are going to force him to make political choices he is not prepared for. The third thread is the corporate one. There are private entities in the show's world, defense contractors, pharmaceutical companies, technology firms, who have been quietly profiting from the superhuman conflict for decades, and the show has shown you their logos in the background more often than the audience has noticed. One of these companies is going to be revealed, eventually, as the source of half the technologies the show's villains have been using, and the corporate sector has been doing what the agency cannot quite admit to doing, and the public reckoning, when it comes, will collapse a major economic structure. The fourth thread is the academic one. The universities of Invincible's world have had to develop, very quietly, programs of study around superhuman biology, around the social effects of having gods in the streets, around the ethics of resurrection and modification. There are scholars in the background of the show whose work the writers are using as the basis for the world building, and some of the show's most interesting ideas are coming from scenes where a graduate student says something offhand in a hallway and the audience is told to remember it. The fifth thread is the ordinary one. The people of Earth and Invincible have opinions about all of this, opinions that the show has been polling with care across the run. There is a large, quiet political center on this Earth that does not love the agency, does not love Mark, does not love any of the heroes, and the show is going to give that political center, eventually, a voice. The writers know this voice would be uncomfortable to dramatize, because it would have to make valid points the heroes cannot easily refute. They are going to do it anyway, the argument runs, that they are going to put a microphone in front of an ordinary person and let that person speak honestly about what it is like to live in a city where Mark Grayson sometimes falls out of the sky. This scene is going to be one of the show's most devastating, and it is going to recalibrate, for the audience, what heroism looks like from the ground. The 40th conspiracy is the one about the audience, and it is the one that should be said last, because it is the one that makes all the others possible. The reading is that the audience watching Invincible has been, across its run, doing a kind of work that the show could not do without them. The first thread is that the audience has been holding the show in its memory across the long gaps between seasons, that the conversation between fans on the internet has, in real ways, kept the show alive in the cultural conversation during the months when no new episodes were available. The writers know this, and are writing partly for the audience that does this work. A second thread is that the audience has been doing exegesis, the slow, careful interpretation of details, the building of charts and timelines and frame-by-frame analyses that the writers have been responding to and incorporating into the way they continue the story. The show is, in some real sense, co-written with its audience. The suggestion goes that the conversation between writers and fans is one of the longest and most attentive in modern animation, and that the show is what it is because both sides of the conversation are showing up. The third thread is that the audience has been forgiving the show its rough edges, its delays, its occasional inconsistencies, its recasting, its long stretches of waiting, because the audience trusts the writers to deliver. This trust is rare. It is the kind of trust that a show earns over years, and once earned, it allows the writers to do things they could not otherwise do. The fourth thread is that the audience has been carrying, between seasons, a private library of theories about every character, every event, every plant and payoff. This library is one of the show's most important resources, and the writers, when they finally pay off the long arcs, are paying off not just the on-screen setups, but the years of audience anticipation. When the final season arrives, the audience is going to feel that the writers have been listening, even when the listening was not visible. The fifth thread is the one this whole video has been arguing without quite saying. It is that Invincible is, at its heart, a show about whether love can survive in a universe that has more power in it than love can keep up with. This question is what every other thread in this list is really pointing at. Cecil's surveillance is about love. Robot's transgressions are about love. Eve's limits are about love. Debbie's grief is about love. Nolan's regrets are about love. The Empire's project of breeding is about love that has been turned into policy. The Coalition is about love stretched across species. The audience's patience is about love for a story. And the writers are, in the end, making a long, quiet argument that love is the only force in this universe that scales with the violence. It does not always win, it does not always survive, but it shows up, every season, in the shape of small choices that the audience recognizes. Underneath the bloody fights and the galactic politics and the body counts, the show has been a love story all along, about a son and his mother, about a father and his sons, about two young people who keep finding each other despite the universe, about a man named Cecil who, in his worst moments, believed he was doing it for the people he could not stop loving, even when they failed him. The audience has known this the whole time, that this is why they keep watching, and that the show, when it finally ends, is going to land on this argument with a quietness that the fights will not have prepared anyone for. Love, in the universe of Invincible, is the most conspiratorial force of all. It hides, it manipulates, it pretends to be something else. It uses other names, but it is what is moving the pieces, every season, in every frame. It is late now, and the lights have been low for a while, and if you have stayed with me through all of this, then you understand why a show like Invincible asks for a long, patient kind of attention. It is not just an action show. It is not just a comic adaptation. It is a long, careful, brutal, often quiet meditation on what power does to a family, and on what a family can do to a galaxy in return. The theories the audience has built around it are not, in the end, paranoid readings. They are the natural response to a show that has been planting clues this carefully for this long. The audience has been treating the show with the kind of attention the writers have been earning, and the show has, mostly, rewarded that attention. There will be a final season. There will be a final scene. The audience will, almost certainly, argue about it for years after it airs. Some of the conspiracies in this video will be confirmed. Others will be rendered impossible. A few will be quietly retired without explanation. And one or two will turn out to have been pointing at something the writers themselves did not yet know they were planting. That is how long-form storytelling works at its best. The writers are smart, the audience is patient, and the meeting point between them is a place where stories that begin as superhero shows become something closer to literature. Invincible has, by any honest measure, earned that comparison. Its place in the broader landscape of modern animation is going to be argued about for a long time. Its influence on the way other shows handle violence, family, and politics is already visible, and the long, quiet evenings of fans tracing its details, in videos like this one, in forums, in comment threads, in conversations over coffee, are part of the show's afterlife already. There is no clean ending available for a story this long. There is only the slow understanding that the people who made it cared about it as much as the people watching it did, and that the love between those two groups, between writers and audience, has produced something that is going to outlast both of them. So, if you are still here, eyes half closed, the lights low, the show in your head running quietly through the scenes you remember best, then this video has done what it set out to do. The story is bigger than any single conspiracy. The pieces fit together in ways even the writers may not yet have fully decided. And the universe of Invincible, as long as it keeps being made, will keep producing the kind of conspiracies that make people stay up too late thinking about it. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.